All right, hello and welcome everyone. This is the ClickUp Forms webinar, and we're about to get started in just a minute. First thing I'd like to point out is that there are sections down the bottom of Zoom for question and answers and also chat. Just a note, we do have a couple of our customer support representatives online who'll be moderating the questions throughout, but please do make sure you put them in the Q&A section. We won't be answering questions directly in the chat. Okay. Now, currently, you won't be able to see anything on your screen. That should be coming up in just a second. All right, let's just check that everything's working as it should be. If that's all working, please let us know in chat. Okay, awesome. Cool, well, let's get started then. All right. So today we're going to be talking about the forms feature specifically, and particularly looking at some remote work use cases. Obviously, a lot of people have recently gone remote. We want to make sure that we're helping those people out, and forms are a really helpful feature. Now, it can be used for just a huge number of different applications, but that's one of them. So we'll kind of go over a few, and yeah, if you have any questions, we'll answer them at the end. And just as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, so you will be able to get access to a copy afterwards if you do want to go back and look at anything again. Okay, so first of all, what are forms? So forms are a feature that allows you to share a link with a number of questions that people can fill out, and the answers to all of those questions will become a new task. So it's a good way to either record information or have just anything submitted from either inside of ClickUp, from teammates, or from outside of ClickUp, from anyone else. You typically use them either to get information from outside of ClickUp, because obviously people outside of your ClickUp can't create a new task, or from teammates within who do have access to your ClickUp when you want to really specify how the information should be entered. So for example, on a form, you have the ability to give each question a name, whereas on a task, the actual kind of custom field name may be much shorter or less descriptive. You can also give a default answer. So here we've just got enter number, but you could really write anything. Cool. Some other things you might use forms for is to ensure that certain answers have been provided. So when you're creating a task, you don't have to use custom fields, even though the option is there. There's no kind of warning if you don't enter a custom field. However, if you're submitting that task via a form, you can make the fields required, which means that people need to enter each of these fields in order to submit the form. So that can be really helpful as well. Cool. So generally the two use cases are collecting data from people outside of ClickUp, either client orders, feature requests, or lots of other things, or streamlining communication internally from team members. So how does ClickUp use them? That's something I wanted to cover in this webinar as well. So internally at ClickUp, we use forms for things like job applications. Actually, if you go to our careers page, we've got one here. And if you hit apply now, it'll just go straight to our ClickUp form. And that's how we kind of manage the workflow of going through applicants and interviewing and such. We also have one for bug reporting, which you may have seen if you've ever submitted a bug here. This will actually just load straight into a ClickUp form. And once you submit the bug request there, or bug report, it will create a task for our Q&A team to then identify and fix. We also have a slightly less known one. We have some service partners, so they're like consultants who if you want to become one, obviously you have to click up, you have to fill in a form. And then also if you are to contact one, you'll fill in a form. So it'll take you straight to a contact form here. So those are some of the ways that we use forms internally, but obviously that's only a small number of the total possible use cases. Awesome. Okay, so now first of all, I want to go through a basic example. So let's go into my example space here. I'm just going to create a new list. So one of the most common ways of using forms is a ticketing system. Now, a ticketing system might be, say, for customer support, but it could also be for particular types of work. So for example, if you're an expert in your company and various people want to request your time or some help from you, very common for, say, like lawyers, they might have legal reviews that are requested. It's really handy to have each of those kind of noted as a work item, so you can kind of just work through them. So we can do that with a form, and it makes it really easy for people to submit those requests in the format that you would like. Cool, so let's create a form here. So we'll go add new view up the top, go to form and add view. Now the form gives us a few default fields. So first of all, we have the ability to add a picture just to make it look a bit prettier. Give the form a name, a description, name the submit button. We can type something else here, and then edit a response. All of the questions are on the left-hand side and we can add them. Now we can add just about any field to the form and then give it a name and standard answer. We can also create custom fields for extra questions. So let's for example say that this is a ticketing system for customer support. So we might name this, and the name the customer or the person filling in the form will see. So we'll give this a good name. So we say like submit your question. No, let's just say ask a question. We'll give it a nice picture. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see this, but there we go. Just got a ClickUp logo there, and that'll pop up nicely at the top. Now we could give it a description just to help people know why they're filling in the form or what's going to happen. So we'll just say, ask a question, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Fix up a few spelling errors, and there we go. Now, the task name, this is the main thing we're going to see. And you don't have to include this. If you don't include a task name, then when you go to submit the form, let's just go view form here for a second. It's going to come through with absolutely no information, and it's just going to have this form submission with the timestamp. So if you do, for some reason, not want to have task names or just want to see the timestamp, that is a way to do it. However, in my case, I just always use the task name because I want something to be able to clearly see what this task is. And in this case, I'd either use this for their name or maybe a brief description of the issue, depending on what I think is more likely to come through and be helpful. So in the example entry, I'll just put type your name here. Cool. Right, so what else we need is probably a description of what the issue is. Now we could make a custom field with text area, but in this case, I think I'm just going to use the task description. Might be more helpful, and I'll name that describe your issue. Cool, and I'll just leave it as enter text. That seems fine. We probably want an email, so I'll create a custom field for that. We'll just call it email. Cool. And maybe put that, let's put it just below the name so that they make sure they fill it out. And all of these are required. That's good. We'll leave that on. Cool. So you kind of get the idea. You could add extra custom fields for, what type of issue are you having with like the drop downs, yes and no questions, some extra text for something else, lots of other things. But this is the basics. And then we'll change the name of the submit button to ask, and then we'll give a more helpful response. So perhaps we'll say exactly when we're going to get back to them. So we'll say we'll get back to you within 1 week, for example. Awesome. And then we can see our form here and fill it in. Let's try filling it in just so we see what the process looks like. So my name is Justin. My email is test@test.com. And my issue is I'm testing this form. All right, hit ask, get the thank you message. Now here I haven't included any advanced functions like redirecting, so it'll just leave me at the thank you message. Now if I go back to the list view, I can see that my task is there. In the description, I've got my message and I've got my email there in a custom field. Perfect. Awesome, okay. Let's just go over a few other points and then we're going to move on to some tips and tricks. And then at the end of the webinar, we'll go over a whole bunch more use cases. Yeah, so one thing I wanted to mention is if you were to use this for, say, instead of customer support, maybe you are an expert or you might be a lawyer, a designer, an engineer who has requests from throughout your company. And you could have a list like this just for yourself for requests that are coming into you, or it could be for a whole team. So it might be that your marketing department has a list with work requests, and then any other department can kind of make a request for marketing that they need. Also, when a form response comes in, you often want to take actions on that or have it set up a certain way. And we've just released an automation feature, which makes that really, really easy. So in this case, and first out, I'll point that you can just assign new form submissions to a person. For example, I could assign it to myself and maybe Shane as well. But with automation, you can also do a few extra things. So the quick one is just add some watchers. So for example, I might want, let's say, Sophia and Willow to see these new form responses, but maybe they're not responsible for them. So Shane and myself will be assigned, and then Sophia and Willow will be watchers. Cool. A couple of other things that I'll point out that go really well with forms. The first one is date created. So this is just another form I have. I'll walk you through it later, but I'm going to show you what it looks like to see the date created field. Now in this case, I imported these all at the same time. So the date created is all exactly the same. But with a normal task, the date created will be when it's created. So when someone has actually entered the information. It's the same with forms. So instead of really being when the task was created, it was what day was this answer submitted. So for things like customer support or even just any sort of work requests, it can be really handy to know how long ago was the form submitted, particularly if you want to sort by that so that you're answering the earliest submissions first. Second one is embed view. So we have this form and we've got a link for it. Let's just open another one. And you can kind of send people this link, but sometimes that's not the best way to kind of make it easy to find. Everyone has to remember the link or have it copied somewhere. So instead of that, what we can do is just copy that link and then perhaps somewhere where it's useful. So let's say I want my sales team to have access to this easily. We can simply create an embed view and then use that URL to embed the ClickUp form in ClickUp. So when they're kind of doing their work, they're over here doing stuff, they can just jump straight to that embed and or fill in the form. So particularly good for work requests. They're working on some sort of sales activity and they need to request some graphic design. They can just jump over here, request it, hit submit, and then get back to work. Really easy. You can also embed them in documents. So ClickUp Docs. We'll go into here, go embed, and then paste the link, and then we'll get it as well. So I'm going to just expand this so we can see it all in one go. Just until that scroll bar disappears. There we go. Nice. So anyone coming to this doc will be able to look at it. Now, you probably wouldn't do this if the only thing you have embedded in this doc is this form. But for example, if you had a whole bunch of text and different pages, and maybe you have different forms on different pages, or a big description about what the form is at the top with the form at the bottom, it can just be handy to slot it into other content and make it really an overall good system. Cool. And then the last thing there that I wanted to point out. So yeah, in either of these cases, particularly with internal team, I mentioned it at the start, if you're embedding it in an embed view or in a doc, one thing that you can allow, which is very, very useful, is to have these as required fields. So perhaps, my team maybe knows where this form goes. They can go find it and they could create a task there. But if they did that, they would not be forced to fill out these custom fields. Whereas if they just have this embed view, I can force them to only submit a task if they complete all of these fields. And that can be really, really helpful. Okay, next up, one of the advanced features over on the side of forms over here is that we can assign a task template. So for example, let's say application submission. Now my application submission task template has certain details. And you can save just about anything on a task with a task template. So let me show you that. So here we've got a very blank task, and now I'm going to load a template, and we'll just pick that application submission one. So I've got a few different ones there you can see. And so now I've got a whole bunch of custom fields with example data in them. Now you can also save things like priority, assignees, the description, subtasks, if you want to have a process or checklists that people go through. Particularly useful if there's a workflow that needs to be done on submissions, due dates, time estimates, etc. So all of that can be automatically applied to the submissions that come in. So once again, I'll just go back to that form. So over here, on the right-hand sidebar, use template to create task, and you can simply select one. Now, I believe that is a feature that's limited to either unlimited plan or business plans, but it is very helpful if you do have access to it. Now there's up the top here, there's a list to save tasks in. Because I'm on a list here, that will always just be the list. However, you can create forms at the folder or space level, or even the everything level. And in that case, you will need to select which list below that those answers are going to go into. Cool. Another very cool feature is the redirect URL. So before, when we submitted our form, we kind of got that thank you message, and it just kind of left us there. However, you could have it redirect somewhere else instead. So that could be, your home page. It could be a payment method if they're submitting payment afterwards after requesting work. It could even be another form. So if you wanted like multi-page forms, you can have them fill out one, hit submit there, then go to the next one. I'll show you a good use case for that later. Cool. And then in terms of a few more advanced functionalities, one thing that works really, really well with forms and form submissions is automation. So I showed you the kind of quick ones down here. I'll give you a quick look at the more advanced ones. So we have a whole bunch of recipes here, and the particularly useful ones for forms is creation. So when a task is created is the trigger, and anytime a form is filled in, that's considered a task creation because it will put all those details in a task. So then you can simply say, well, what else do I want to have happen? Now you could, change the status, add assignees. I'd be tempted to say use a template instead. It's just a simpler process, and there's a limitation on how many automations you can use per month, but there's no limitation on how many templates are applied during the creation process of using the form. However, things like move to list can't be done unless with anything other than automation. So for example, here, you say when the task is created, move to another list. Now you don't want that to happen all the time. Otherwise, you should just create the form on that list. But what you can do is add conditions. So for example, if we have a custom field, we might say, if it is equal to this, then move it. So then you can start to stratify different responses. So for example, if you had a help request form and you had 5 different topics that they could request help on, you could have that one form, rather than having 5 forms, have them all come into the same list, but then move to the appropriate list depending on their value in that custom field. So that could be really, really helpful. A couple of other things we could do. Change watches. We've already seen that in the quick one. Apply a template. That's already possible. You probably wouldn't want to archive the task. Oops, we're in the wrong one. Creation. Here we go. But yeah, same kind of actions. Now, if you aren't finding actions that you want, you can also go to custom automation and pick from a whole list. So you would select task created as the trigger, but then there is a whole bunch of different actions. You can change tags, track time, add a comment. Adding a comment, you can also assign it. So if you did want an assigned comment on each new form submission, things like that are possible. Anyway, that is automation, very, very helpful, particularly moving to different lists. Okay, next one I want to show you is the formula field. So we recently released a formula field which can do either simple or spreadsheet style calculations. So I've actually got one here. So this is a fairly simple use case. It's just looking at how likely people are to recommend this product and how many times they use it. And then it's doing a little calculation on that. So here I've got the spreadsheet style calculation. You can turn off the advanced editor and just do one field with a mathematical operation and then a second field. So for example, if you had a form submission for, I don't know, all sorts of things, number of something that they want to purchase and then price, and then you can multiply them or something like that. In my case, I've just got an if function. So if these two things are high enough, then say high, otherwise say uncertain. So here we've got the likelihood that they are going to continue using and purchasing these products. If you want to create a formula field, it's just under the add new custom field column here. All right. Now dashboards you've probably seen or heard of, but they're great for graphing data. And so because we have kind of this bulk data coming in from our form with lots of different people submitting it, we can then take that data and make visualizations out of it. So let's jump into one here. So you got like pie charts. You could do kind of key tasks just to highlight them based on some filters, metrics. I'm not going to go into too much depth here. There are other training materials, and this is a forms webinar, not a dashboard webinar, but I just wanted to give you the basic high-level view of what's possible. So this one obviously needs to be updated. It's not loading very well, but you can get some line charts, bar charts, etc., that sort of thing, to analyze your responses. Lastly, hopefully everyone is fairly aware that we have statuses. So here I've just got simple open and close statuses, but you could instead edit list statuses and create custom ones and do something more like a whole list of statuses. So these ones are based on content. We go through multiple stages of writing an approval and getting approved or rejected before you publish. So if I save that, it needs me to map the to-do status because it no longer exists. So I'll just map it to open. And then you can go through a workflow. So very, very helpful for, say, technical support questions that might come in through a ticketing system from a form. We need to go through multiple steps to get those kind of dealt with and finished. Okay, so those are a whole bunch of tips and tricks and various other features that you can use with forms. Now we're going to jump into some other use cases. So the first one I want to kind of talk about and think about is kind of like a small solo practitioner. So here I've got a lawyer, but it could be anything. It could be an accountant, even a GP or something else. And in recent times, a lot of people have gone remote. So people who perhaps would have had a small office space may now be working from home and still need to kind of request or gather data from clients. So in a lawyer's case, and obviously I'm not a lawyer, if any of you are lawyers, you'll probably have far more insight into the various workflows of a lawyer. But basically, as a new client signs up, you need information from them. So what we could do is create a form here and then kind of add various details about that person. So it might be their name, their email, their phone, and then probably a whole bunch of specifics to do with their legal requirements, retainers, who knows what else. I'm sure there's lots of questions that lawyers will have for potential customers. Then as kind of work comes in, those people might submit different cases. I need help with this or that. And each time they could simply go to a form and submit the details of that case. So in that case, we might say that we use a task name as, say like ish. So I kind of want to be descriptive here so the person knows what to fill in. So I don't want to just call it case name. I might say something more like, what do you need help with? And that's going to give me a descriptive name that I'm going to use as a task name to easily identify this task. Then I'd add custom fields, maybe say, you know, when does this need done by, and add a due date. And then you kind of get an idea of the various specifics you might add as custom fields. So it's probably going to be, you know, a lot of questions about what happened, how it happened, what's needed, etc., etc. And depending on what type of lawyer they might be, they might do practice several different types of law. So we could have a drop-down custom field where you might say, okay, we do like, you know, land surveying. Trying to think of different types of lawyering practices now. You know, divorce and civil suit, for example. We can give each of them colors just to make them pretty. Awesome. So then we can have that on there, and we can use that to stratify into different lists. So let's say a good question for that might be, what type of help is required? Cool. And let's quickly just make a submission there, so we've got something to work with. So I need help with land title transfer. Need this to be done by next week. And it's land surveying. Cool. So now we have one task in our list. Now I'm going to create actually I'm going to do a couple of things here. So first of all, when a new client signs up, probably they are signing up because they need something. So I could add all those same questions down the bottom, but then I'm going to end up with a task in this list which kind of has information for this list. It's going to be a bit confusing. So instead of that, what I've done is added a redirect URL, and that URL is actually just the sharing URL of this form. So when I go to this form, I'm a new client, great. I go view form here. Okay, I enter my name, my email, my phone number, hit submit. Did I? There we go. And it's going to take me to the thank you message quickly, and then go to the next form. So now I'd probably set this one up to say, also, do you need any help? That kind of question. Maybe with a description to help the process flow well, but then that person can immediately submit what they need help with. And then this response will go into that case list. So then we kind of have both. We have both their information and the problem they need help with. So that can be very useful. When it goes to that case list, I definitely want it to be stratified. So instead of having this as a list, I might actually make this a folder and then have multiple lists. So I might have one here for land surveying. Let's just rename that. And then this is going to be my kind of central list that everything comes into. And I'll set up an automation to say that when a task is created, then move it to another list. That list name is going to be land surveying, but only if the type is equal to land surveying. Done. And by the way, that's how easy it is to create an automation. We're pretty happy with what we're able to create there for you all. Okay, so what do you need help with? Let's just say land surveying. When does it need it done by? Maybe 2 weeks for this one. What type of help? Land surveying, submit. Let's see if we can catch it mid-action. No, too slow. It's already been immediately moved to this land surveying list. So that's kind of some ideas around what's possible for perhaps a lawyer and using automation to divide one form into multiple lists. The other kind of example I've got here is an office team. Now this is generic, it kind of applies to lots of people. So it could be just anyone who was recently working in a big office and now is kind of dispersed and all, working from home. It's quite different because you do lose the ability to communicate in a very kind of side-by-side type way. And so this kind of helps streamline communication and just make sure everything's in the right place. So one thing that I really love is an ideas list. And often when you're around people, you can kind of bounce ideas back and forth and kind of come up with some good things. When you're all remote, it's really good to still capture that innovation and creativity. We all have good ideas, our teams have good ideas. We want to actually put those to use and have them improve our business. So here we can create a form for submission of ideas. And now you could leave this quite open, just say like, maybe you want to identify what their name is, maybe not, depends on how you feel. I've used the wrong one there. I'm going to use the task name for their name instead. And this is the description. And I'll say, what is your idea? Now that's very basic, just kind of dump it all in one text area. What you could instead do is have multiple text areas, maybe with the long text custom field, and kind of stratify it into different questions, like, how would this help? Or what value would this bring? How do you see this being done? Who would be involved? Questions like that. So you can end up with really quite a well-formulated idea, so it's easier to then review. One thing I would suggest here, I'll just quickly make a submission as well. So Justin, let's say free ice cream Fridays. How would this help? Morale. And hopefully your teams will give more information than this, but just doing this quickly. So there we go. We've got one there. Now, one thing I think would be quite helpful for an ideas list would be to put a date on when it should be reviewed by. It's really easy to have a whole bunch of ideas and then just have them all kind of get lost and forgotten and just not have anything happen. So the best way to do that is probably with a task template, which has a due date on it, but you could also do it via automation if you preferred. So again, we'll probably go custom automation here, go task created, and then apply a due date, change due date. Yep. And rather than picking a date, would go days from trigger date. So maybe it's 10 days out from when the form is submitted. So that could be very helpful. Cool. Next one up is issues. So issues, I've kind of just given a very generic name. For ClickUp, this is bugs. So we have a bug reporting form, but if you're not a software company, issues might be something else. It might be issues in the supply line, customer issues, just anything that's a problem that needs to be brought to attention. And this would, have fairly standard fields like what is the issue, when did it occur, how urgent is it? You might use the priority as a question for the urgency, just to have a list of what's happening and make it easy to deal with. If issues are written down, then it's easy to kind of work through them, figure out which is the most important, and get them solved. Key thing there would be, I would suggest, and I love automation, so I do keep bringing them up, but if you have a very high priority issue, then having certain actions. So if I have like a task created where the priority is high or urgent perhaps, we can do both. And then also maybe we have a custom field which says like what is the issue with? And if it's with a critical thing, then we might want to say, okay, in that case, we need to deal with this immediately. This is bad, this is urgent. So what we might do is we might actually create a comment. So you could do this various ways. You could assign the boss or whoever it is that can immediately take care of it. You could make them a watcher. I'm just going to create a comment. One now if I can find it. There we go, add comment. I'm just going to say urgent, deal with this now, and then assign it to the boss. I don't actually have a boss on this account. Let's say it's Shane. So he will then get a notification for that. And if I want to be double sure, I can even mention him, although he'll still get a notification regardless. Whoops, that's not how it works. Shane. Cool. All right, next example, design requests. So this is similar to what I was talking about before with specific departments having work requests. So in this case, it could be, designers, we want some graphic design from them, and we can, list out the various inputs that they want from us in order to get that done. So they might have quite a specific process and specific information they want, and they can all put that, and they can put that all on a form, so that when you're requesting design work, you have to answer those questions, and it makes the process flow quite smoothly. They would also work well for, a lawyer for legal review, maybe a database engineer, a subject matter expert, lots of things, just to have those requests flow smoothly and be easy to manage. Next one is client feedback. So this is perhaps a form that you'd publish publicly. Really great for getting kind of just a vibe of how easy your products or services are to use, maybe to make improvements, and then also to an easy place to gather positive feedback that you could then use in marketing or just keep the team morale up. So a very, very handy one to have there. I won't go through the questions too much. I think everyone kind of would either have your own questions for what kind of things you'd like to ask, or just generic ones of how did you find a service. You could even do like something like a rating, so rating up to 5 stars, rather than having them do it purely text. Although I would suggest having at least some text in there so that they can kind of give a free form description of why it was good or bad. Change requests. Change requests are particularly for project management. So if you've got an established project that you're doing with a customer and they decide they want to change the scope or need it done faster or something else, oftentimes people will just kind of let that happen, but that can often create scope creep. So where the scope has changed quite a lot, you're doing a lot of extra work now, but it hasn't been recorded and there's no kind of change in payment. So often it's really good to keep track of what has changed. Maybe you don't need to renegotiate the contract every single time, but you can maybe at some point say, hey, look, this is how much the project has changed. Maybe we need to renegotiate now. So we might just have, what is the project? What needs to change? Questions like that. And then perhaps more specific details about trying to get them to give you a bit more information to drill down to the specifics. And then, yeah, there's all sorts of questions you could put on there. I'll leave that up to you, but really great to then have just a complete list of all the changes from that project. So for me, on any project list or folder, wherever the project lives, I would probably want to have at least one list within there that I could funnel change requests into. Awesome. And now my last example for today, I want to look at analyzing data. So here we have a survey response. So we've just got a very basic customer survey. It asks about what your preferred product was. In this case, the options are apple, orange, pear, and bananas. I don't quite know what that stands for, but we're then asking how many times did they use the service and how likely are they to recommend it to a friend. So now we want to get some insights from this information. We've had about 40 responses. So the first thing I would do is create a calculation on this column. So here we've got the calculate button and we can choose from sum, average, or range. Now this is how likely they are to recommend us. So I've left it as an average. Then you can see the answer was there, the entire column value, but you can also just see it at the bottom. Now this happens per group. So currently everything's in one group because they're all in the open status. But if I wanted to instead see it, say, when grouping by, we don't have assignees or anything else here, probably just by custom field. So what I want here is the product custom field. And then I can see the likelihood of recommending based on the product. So for apples, it's 3.5. For oranges, it's only 3. For pears, 3.38. Bananas, 3.13. So that can start to give us really interesting insight into the different ways of segmenting the data. Similarly, I've got a question around how many times they've used the service, and I've just totaled this. So the calculation here is just a sum. So for apples, we've got a total of 90, 60 for oranges, 44 for pears, 61 for bananas. So we can immediately tell that apples are being used the most. We've then got the product itself, and then our formula field that we looked at earlier. Now, instead of doing that, we could group by our other custom field, which is, I've called it recommend, I think. Here we go. So now we've got out of the people who recommended us only a 1. So that means they're probably not likely to use us again. Interesting. They both use peers. So perhaps that's an issue, they're kind of highlighting peers. For number 2, seems like quite a mix. Number 3, quite a mix. Interestingly, we have quite a few peers in people who've recommended us the 5s. We can also see the numbers. So you can see how you can start to cross-reference data and just get some interesting insight. Now, all of this can instead just be graphed in dashboards, but sometimes it can be very nice to just kind of see each individual item and then just see summaries and how it's moving around based on different grouping. That's of course not all you can do. You can also filter. So you could just say, okay, instead of grouping, let's go back to, actually let's leave it grouped by recommended, but then let's filter to only see where the product is, let's say oranges. And we can quickly see, okay, where the recommendation was 2 and the product was oranges, then we can start to see the totals here. So you can get some, if you have more custom fields, you can cut and slice it in more ways, but you can start to get some quick ideas of what the information looks like. Cool. And then if you have particularly numeric custom fields, you can do quite a lot of analysis through having multiple formula fields. So here I've just got the 1 because I've only got the 2 numeric columns. But if you did have a lot of numeric columns, you could do a lot. Now, currently, a column like this, which is our product, has text values. As of right now, you can't use text values in a formula field. However, that's coming very, very soon. So shortly, you'll be able to pull in those text values and then do spreadsheet type functions on them to also analyze those, which is going to be really neat. Okay, that's most of what I've got for you today. I'm just going to point out a couple of extra, more advanced uses and features of forms, and then we're going to go to questions. Cool. So you can, of course, turn off and on forms. So perhaps you've made it public, but then you've gotten all the responses you need. You can simply turn it off up here. When you're sharing it, this button allows you to copy the link directly or copy it with the correct coding needed to embed it somewhere. You can either auto size height or have it be a certain set height. This little cog icon simply opens and closes the advanced options. We've talked about the list it needs to be saved in, automatically assigning it to people, using a template redirecting. There is a light and dark mode. So if we hit dark mode there and then go view form, you'll see it looks like this. You can also give it a primary color and that will affect all these little purple bits. So it can look a little bit different. Okay, apparently it does not affect those. That's interesting. Because they don't actually appear on the form, that's why. Yep. So it's just the elements that do appear, which does include the little asterisks there for required fields. You can turn off the ClickUp branding if you're on, I think, business plan or above. And there's also a quick button here to add all answers to the description of the task. So now if we had a description, then anything typed in there would go into the description, but below that, it would also add the answers for all of these. So sometimes it can be helpful to have just all answers as just one long text field in the description, as well as in each custom field that can be filtered on or sorted by, all that kind of thing. Now, in each question, we can obviously edit the name and the text, make it required. There's a couple of extra options here. And one of them will be, add task to a description, which we've just talked about. The second option is to have it as a hidden field. If you make it a hidden field, people cannot enter it. They cannot see it, cannot enter it. However, you see in the URL up here that we've got your name equals XXXX. So what that's doing is it's giving us the ability to pass that information to the form from the URL. So for example, if I paste this again, I say your name is, say, Tim, then whenever someone fills this out, it's going to automatically give their name as being Tim. And this can be done for, I believe, text fields and email fields, and I think one other as well. So I'm just going to fill this out and submit. Now, if we go back to our list, you'll see Tim at the bottom. And so even though I never entered the name Tim, it has appeared here. Now, that can be very helpful if, for example, you are doing like a bulk email sending where you can kind of like use variables to change parts of the text you're sending out. So you could use a variable here so that each person gets a form which will automatically enter their name and email, for example. Or you could do it to stratify people who are entering the form. So for example, you might have a bunch of different products and you can simply use one form for everyone ordering any of those products, but each button would link to a different hidden value. So for example, if I said here apples, and then this is the URL I use for the apples button. And then I can simply use the same URL, but with oranges for the oranges button. So depending on which button people click, they get a different URL, which autofills different information. So it's a more of an advanced function, but it can be very helpful for a few more advanced features and just autofilling information and then kind of making, oftentimes you want to have people self-select different options, but it's too risky to put it on the form. You know, on a job form, you wouldn't want to put the option for them to say experienced, because everyone will just click that. But it might be useful to have different buttons and have it autofill in different ways where you can kind of control it with the URL, but the person filling in the form isn't super aware of it. All right, cool. That's it for my content for today. I'm going to jump into some questions. I believe Amy and Sophia have also been answering questions as we have gone. So I'll just start jumping through a few that haven't been answered yet. Okay, so first of all, we've got one that would be good to answer live. So would be interesting in a form to hand over from business team to tech team for client onboarding. Yeah, that'd be a great use case. This should set up tasks for the tech team. Yep, so I mean, that sounds great. So that would kind of be like the request type form. So you set up a form for the tech team where it has all the questions the tech team needs to know. The business team then fills it in, hits submit for each client to hand over. It'd be interesting to think about, does the business team already have a task? They could just move it instead, but perhaps their task has separate information. They want to create a new one for the tech team, in which case that could make a lot of sense. Or it could just be, extra information to say, hey, here's a handover, go look for the task here. You could even have a website custom field where you link to the task that currently exists. That could work as well. So yeah, that sounds like a great use case. Next question, is there currently any way to generate any report stats from forms? Like how many form submissions were received in total? How many were, yeah, definitely. So dashboards. Dashboards is where you'll do stats like that. So for example, we could have a metric field here, or sorry, calculation widget, is what they're called. We'll choose our location. So for example, our wherever the form tasks are going to, we're going to do the task count, and then we'll filter. You'd use filters if you want to kind of specify like certain answer in the forms, like how many forms were submitted where the product was apples, something like that. For now, I'll just count the total, hit save, and we'll see that there are 41 responses. And we might just add responses as the unit there, put it on the right. Then we can see 41 responses, ta-da. So yeah, that's how you'd see metrics. And then you could also do the same thing and pull the information into a graph and then, display based on certain metrics. Either number of tasks in with different responses or however you want to dice it up. Okay, next question. Can this be used for onboarding for a website project to collect copy and files? Yeah, definitely. So the only thing I'd say with collecting a large amount of copy is it might be frustrating for people to have to write it all out and hit save. If their computer dies halfway through filling the form, Because it hasn't been submitted yet, I don't believe it will be saved unless their browser does that automatically. But other than that, yeah, if it's short, or you might want to just make it several kind of forms, one form for each page or something, might just make it a slightly more user-friendly for them. But you could definitely say, all right, great, here's my form for the website, and you have, new website, what kind of, text fields, long text fields for what kind of thing do you want said about this product, a number, maybe a number custom field for how many pages do you want. You can certainly get all that information. Right, next question. Can this be used for onboarding? Oh, wait, that was the same one. Okay. Can you use forms for expense approvals? Yes, definitely. That'd be a great use case, actually. So you'd say form is expense approval request. Then you'd have, I guess, a currency custom field for the amount. Where is it, money? Then you might have either text or a drop down for like the reason, like the type of expense it was. You'd use drop down or labels if it was very set types that are always the same, or text if it kind of changed every time. And then it would go to a list, and the list would probably have a workflow of, new, approved, rejected, complete. So, or, you might use approved as the final status, depending on what you prefer. So then the manager might get added as an assignee, and then when they see new requests come in, they can approve them or decline them. And then the person submitting it would get a notification about that. And that's an interesting point. It's a very interesting point, actually. Let's go into our ticketing system. The created by field is very interesting. If you are logged into ClickUp, when you submit a form, it will note that you are the person who created it. If someone outside of your ClickUp or someone who is not logged in creates it, it will just come up as ClickBot. So this one I actually did via a CSV import. Let's just see what it says. Okay, I did the import, so it's marking it as me. I don't actually have any here that I submitted while being logged out, but yeah, it'll come up as ClickBot. So yeah, instead of relying on that, it might be better to have a question that just says, what is your name? So that way they can enter who they are, regardless of whether they're logged in or out. Okay, next question. When assigned tasks to is set to an assignee in the form, set to an assignee in the form, and there's in the list also an automation set on the create task trigger, which is executed first. That is a good question. I would say that most likely this form one would be executed first. The automation likely would delay slightly behind it and therefore override it. I haven't tested that, but you probably want to avoid that just so that because you're then losing this information. I guess in some cases you want it to override in certain cases. Let's test it. Let's have a go. So we'll say, right, always assign this task to Dylan. It's also possible if you have multiple assignees on, it will just add assignees. So actually, let's turn multiple assignees off, because I think in that case it would be no problem. You just end up with both. But in the case where you only have a single assignee, then it becomes more tricky. Okay, so we've got assign task to Dylan on the form. Let's say always assign task to me. Great. Let's go view form. Name, Jim, idea, help. Cool. Interesting. So it's assigned both. So it's overridden the fact that we only have a single assignee. That's probably a bug, although also it's kind of helpful. I kind of like that. But I'll take note of that. Yeah. Cool. Okay, we've got probably about 6 minutes left, so I'll try and get through a few more questions, and then we'll be out of time. Okay, customize form name with custom field or sequence number. Not currently. I assume by form name you mean like the submission name. You can add the task name as a field. People can enter it. It can be a hidden field, and you could therefore use anything that you're using to generate the URL. For example, if you had code or a mailing software that could insert a random number or random number in text, or just whatever customized name you want, you could have that insert the name. Other than that, I don't think it's possible. I don't actually think we have an action for task name, because task name is usually already set. It's a bit strange to be changing that. But yeah, I'd explore the possibility of using task name as a hidden field, and then whatever you can use to generate the URL with the name that you want. Cool. Just checking through a few more questions here. Will we get a copy of all these question and answers at the end of the session? Typically not, Samantha, but do email support down here. We can certainly get you a specific answer if you need. Yeah, that should be possible. On the recording, you'll get everything that has been said, and I believe also the chat messages, but for some reason they don't include the Zoom ones, the Q&A ones. Okay, can you put a minimum days you need to get the work done for due date? Very good question. You could say it in the name. You can't set a logic, like only allow dates within this range. What you could instead do, you could either say preferred date rather than like definite date, or you could say use a number custom field to say, how many days would you like this in? I mean, it's the same thing really, but I just couch the language in terms of what is your preferred date, just so that you're not locking yourself into something that you can't follow through on. Are there text character limits on the responses? I don't believe so. The ones that would have run into trouble first would be the short text, but I think it can be fairly long. I've never run into them yet. Okay, let's just grab a couple more questions. Can I embed the form in an email campaign inside the email marketing software? Yes, you should be able to embed it anywhere that embedding is possible, so that should be no worries at all. When he opens the custom field menu, I'm not seeing choose existing. Good point, good point. So you could definitely add existing. If it exists on the list, it'll already be available in the custom fields here. Let me just jump to something that probably has some custom fields. Yes, you'll see all my existing custom fields here. But if it exists somewhere else in the workspace, but not in this list, it would be very good to have a button that allows you to add existing here. You could still do it, you just have to jump over to list view and then add the existing fields here. But that's a really good note. I'm going to write that down. Cool. Thank you, Megan. Okay, let's grab two more. Is there a way to export filtered list to MailChimp? Use case is list of signups for a certain product and development for pre-order. Once the order is ready for shipping, MailChimp is deploying the email campaign to the pre-order clients. Would that be possible? Yes, definitely. So once your tasks come into your list here, you can export the list view and the button up the top here, the three dots, export view. Now, list view is just what you see here. You might want to go all columns, depending on what you prefer, date formats, time formats, and then download it as a CSV, which should be uploadable straight into MailChimp, you said. Yeah. Yep. Okay, and last one. With the second step form, so this is where you have one form and then redirect it to another. Does it know it's from the same user as the first form? No. So that's kind of more of a cool trick rather than an inbuilt part of the software. So it'll be two separate form submissions and they'll go to each individual lists. What I would suggest is using a unique identifying field. So something like their email. That way you can easily match them together. However, if you do, it's kind of a thing that can be neat in some cases, but I wouldn't judge your case to see if it's going to be useful or not. In a lot of cases, it would be easier to simply have all the questions in one field, on one form, and therefore going into one list, so they're all together. It's just there might be cases where you kind of don't want that to happen because the information is of two quite different types, and it can be helpful to separate them out. Okay, that's all the time we have for today. Sorry, folks, but thank you very much for attending. I hope this has been really helpful, and the meeting recording will be sent out to you. And if you do have any questions that weren't able to get answered, do remember you can always contact us via chat, and we'll do everything we can to help you out. Awesome. Well, have a great Thursday, and I'll see you next time.